Today, we think of intelligence as determined by a series of factors related to genetics, environment, education, perhaps even randomness itself, some aspects of which may correlate with belonging to a particular social group and others not. The key here, though, is that we don't fully understand how or how much some of these factors work. How do elements like personal history and conditions like poverty, access to education, stress, even nutrition affect someone's scores on cognitive tests? And the big question is, do our genetics influence our intelligence, or does our environment? And this is an easy question to answer because they both do. And that is important. If the history of intelligence testing has taught us anything, it's that assuming everyone is smart in the same way and for the same reason can lead to disastrously bad conclusions. So let's look at the scientific evidence, and the best place for that is the wealth of twin and adoption studies, which have been fascinatingly helpful in illustrating how genetics and environment can both influence intelligence. For example, research has shown that identical twins who were raised together have the highest rate of similarity in intelligence scores of any group. Fraternal twins who share only half the genes tend to be much less similar in their scores, even when raised in the same home. The brains of fraternal twins raised in the same home are very similar in some areas, but less so in others. But identical twins who were raised together have the same brain, at least according to neuroimaging scans. Some studies even show that identical twins raised apart from each other show higher intelligence correlation than fraternal twins raised together. In other words, genes appear to matter. You could take 100 kids and raise them in the exact same way, and as adults they'd still have different aptitudes. But does this mean that when it comes to intelligence, we're all nature and no nurture? Well, luckily, and somewhat obviously, no. Life experiences and environment also matter. One sad example of how early environments affect children can be found in the work of American psychologist J. McVicker Hunt in a destitute Iranian orphanage in the 1970s. Conditions were really bad. Infants received minimal care, and whatever attention they did get was on a routine schedule, never in response to whether they were cooing or crying or anything else. Basically, they were being raised with no cause and effect between their behaviors and the responses of their caregivers, and as a result they didn't learn how to communicate. With no stimulation or social response, the kids were just kind of passive, vacant lumps. Deprivation was essentially trumping any inborn intelligence. So Hunt started a program. He trained caregivers to actually talk to infants, to teach them how to mimic sounds and actions, and eventually sounds and words from their language. The results were tremendous. The kids started to learn really quickly and basically just came alive. While it's an extreme example, Hunt's research showed how malleable early childhood intelligence can be, especially in disadvantaged and stressful conditions. So you can see that environment and heredity interact to affect intelligence, and that some tricky implications can come out of that conclusion. But that's hardly the only controversy when it comes to how we view and measure intelligence. There have been some sensational headline-courting studies of genetic and social influences that have suggested that fundamental differences in intelligence may exist between genders and races, but many of these studies are tangled up in questions of how potential testing bias may affect performance. Basically, if a test inadvertently measures differences caused by cultural experiences or social factors instead of what we might call innate intelligence, then you might say that the test is biased. Extreme example, in the past, immigrants to the US were classified as feeble-minded if they couldn't answer distinctly American questions, like who was the first American president, or what's a milkshake? Today, concerns about bias focus on differences among members of the same general culture. Say, a poor rural kid who might be plenty smart but will test low if questions involve urban upper-class concepts like taking taxis and drinking tea out of giant cups or the rules of tennis. So the questions themselves can skew performance results, but who administers the test can also affect outcomes. Women tend to do better with a fellow female administrator, and African Americans often score higher if their test is given by an African American instructor. And the risk of bias may even fall to the test taker's own expectations. For example, many studies have found that if you give a math test to equally capable men and women, but just before starting you tell the subjects that women usually score lower than men, you actually negatively affect the women's performance. This self-fulfilling concern that you might mess up and inadvertently fulfill some negative stereotype is called stereotyping.